G'day, fans, and welcome to another exciting episode 2 of Sci-Fi Zone. It's all very good, very exciting. It's a Monday night. We're all back again after the joy of last week's show. Claire, I'm going to put it this way, Claire is with me at the moment. She's literally the star of the show because she's got the star on the jumper. How good is that? So, Claire, how have you been this week?
Oh, not too bad. Trying to keep busy and all that sort of stuff, and having a lot of fun exploring stuff for this topic.
Very, very, very cool. All right, so there's actually probably a fair bit we can get into, but we will start with our natters of what we've seen science fiction related this week. And Claire's got an absolute ripper. So ironically, one of these images you're about to see is actually the same colour as her jumper. So how good's that? So there you go. So what have we got for you, Claire? What have you got for us, rather? What have you got for us?
Well, I came across this really interesting thing on Facebook. It was a link to a page where they were displaying posters, movie posters, that were created by an AI. So they had fed the AI basically the plot summary of a movie, and then it had created its own movie poster. You can see the first one on the screen there, and they'd done about, they displayed about 16 or 17 of them, and the idea was you had to look at the poster and then try and figure out which movie it was for. So I'd be interested to see if anyone has guesses about which movie this is for. Dags, what do you think? Any ideas?
No, but I think someone's been feeding the old wacky tobacco into the AI because it's obviously tripping out a little bit. It's done a bit of the Picasso, hasn't it? It's gone a bit nuts. You sent me through the two images and the two movies, and I could not work out which is which. So yeah. So if anybody has a clue out there, yes, by all means, put some thought into it and see how you go.
It's kind of interesting because there's a definite style. Like if you look at all the different ones, there's a definite style, and it is kind of a bit out there. So it's interesting. But this one, I haven't seen anyone popping up with guesses just yet. So I'll tell you, this one is actually for The Matrix. So that's kind of interesting. You can see all the connections and the display, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Tron kind of makes sense. You could see that a little bit.
Yeah.
But this one was for The Matrix. And there was one other one that I thought Dags might get. Have a look at this and have a look at this and see what you think.
Well, look, it's very funny. I couldn't help but think that this image here and the stem looked like a glass. And I thought, hang on, we're in a cocktail bar of some description. But no, until you told me, I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm off target. But no idea. Bloody hell.
It's not, it's not particularly obvious. It's an interesting interpretation, but they were all quite interesting because once you knew what they were, it appeared.
See, Angie's probably seen the original picture, so there you go. What do you reckon?
Ready Player One's another suggestion.
Yeah, exactly right.
There were quite a few different. They had done a few different ones, and not all of them were sci-fi. These were the two sort of main sci-fi ones. They'd done them for a few others, and it was kind of interesting. How many I picked a few of them, but there were a lot that I just didn't pick at all, and a few that once you kind of knew what it was, you kind of went, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. All right, so we've got a few suggestions. We've got Star Wars, we've got Ready Player One, we've got Halo. So actually, this is for Star Wars. So, Ange, you were right.
You know why Ange got it right? Because he's at home sitting smoking the wacky tobacco right now. Yeah, man, it looks like Star Wars to me. Absolutely. Oh, it's awesome. I can see a Yoda in there somewhere and a bit of a Grogu thing going on.
It's kind of interesting. But yeah, anyway, that was my kind of, that felt, the idea of an AI producing a movie poster was kind of interesting. So I just thought they were really cool.
Very, very cool. Just give me a second. I've got to cue something up. Yes, absolutely. One thing you could ask is if an AI was fed all this information regarding these movies and everything else, and that's how they interpret it, you could also ask, well, how does an AI interpret the existing world as it currently is? So that would be this sort of discussion for another day, for another Sci-Fi Zone. For myself, I just got to press a button or two. Very, very cool. The latest music video was I found it creepy. I think Duran Duran's a bit of an artificial intelligence, isn't it? So there you go. So here's something funny, right? It was actually, the Paralympics, as they just finished yesterday. The day after last week's episode, there was the road race that took place, and the commentator had seen this helmet on the left, and he said, and this is what I thought spun me out, said, "Oh, they're wearing the Star Wars helmet," and he actually said from 1977, so he clearly knew his stuff. And I thought, well, which helmet would it be? And so I thought maybe it's a Rebel Trooper. But the fact that after our episode last week, that the commentator in the road race happened to say that a helmet looked like a Star Wars helmet was pretty amazing. And the co-commentator also said, "Oh, yeah, it's the Star Wars helmet." So clearly the Star Wars and the Paralympics sort of go hand in hand. What do you reckon, eh? So, yeah, I kind of didn't sort of see it myself, but I thought, hey, look, if it works for them, then fair enough. Now, secondly, we're not really into the business of showing news, but this week, I don't know if you knew this or not, the trailer for Star Wars Visions came out. And do you know what this is, Claire?
No, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I personally think it started off as a fan film thing over in Japan, but anime studios have been given licenses to create their own Star Wars stories, which are not necessarily canon. I think they can do anything that they want. And so 7 studios have gotten together and, or not got, maybe independently, have come across and created their own stories in the anime style. And it's kind of thing was announced last year, and it's already been sort of in the process of being released. And this is how it looks, and it's just like everybody's just gone nuts over it. And I think it has the potential to do really, really, really well. So for those people who like anime and like Star Wars, it's almost like a match made in heaven. And with the stories being able to discuss anything they want, then there's a good chance it'll do extremely well. So what do you reckon?
Yeah, you'll get that crossover audience. You'll get the people who maybe don't know much about Star Wars but love anime, and they'll find this will be a good introduction for them to Star Wars, and vice versa as well, I reckon. People who love Star Wars are going to watch it and maybe get hooked on anime. It's an interesting combination.
Yeah, I think it's
looks
very,
cool.
very clever.
That's the first time I've seen it, and just the visuals on it look really cool.
Yeah, Aaron said it reminds him of the Animatrix, and I guess could be an inspiration for it. I personally think that what happened is some anime studios just said, just for a bit of shits and giggles, is like just put our own Star Wars show together. Lucasfilm was saying that, going, it's awesome, do it professionally, and off you go. And they're now being released, so it could set the world on fire in a big way. Here we go. Michelle said Star Wars anime might be the key word. I'm certainly not going to have the same vibe. Yeah, well, it'll be different. There's no denying that at all. The hard part is if somebody looks at that and goes, you know what, this is superior to all the recent movies that have come out and TV shows and whatever else. That's where you might upset the maker, so to speak. But good on them. So yeah,
people will have their opinions, and I reckon in terms of the vibe being different, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, some of the Star Trek stuff that we've seen lately has had very different vibes, certainly from the original series, and more and more from departing from other series, sort of the vibe behind it. So I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I think it's good to explore those differences. Totally
agree. And I agree with Michelle. Yeah, it won't be detrimental to it at all. If anything, it'll probably enhance it. So, and if at the very least people may say, oh, this is great, give us more, and it'll start up a whole new genre accordingly. So it's Star Wars. Half the fans will, half won't. Those who are not familiar with anime may see it as being encroaching on familiar territory, but you'd have to be pretty hard-assed to go, oh, no, I think it's crap. It's like, no, and they're not canon stories. So, you got to be a little bit, flexible. I mean, if you look at the TV series Resistance, which was actually made a couple of years ago, now, to be fair, it was aimed at kids. That was complete shit, right? And I had to force myself to watch that. And I think most people would agree that in terms of the animated series of the past recent years, it is like the worst. It's just horrendously bad. So, it can't be any worse than that. So there you go.
And you'll jinx it. Don't say that. You'll jinx it.
I look at the Visions thing. I thought, mate, it's there for them to balls it up. I mean, it's just got like success written all over it. Even although, having said that, if you look at the He-Man Revelations scenario when the trailer for that came out, all the Masters of the Universe fans thought, "Oh my God, it's the greatest thing in the entire universe. What could possibly go wrong?" And that's yes, and that was the end of that. Very, 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 very cool. All right, so. Anything else you want to bring up before we move on? No, very, very cool. Now, our key thing tonight is to try and stay on schedule, so we don't want to run over like we did last time. But our main topic What's this? Hope we finally get a Jar Jar story in anime. You never know. Wouldn't that be funny, eh? So
Could
a
work.
Jar Jar Binks.
Could work really
Sorry,
well.
go on.
Could work really well, actually. He'd be a good
Yeah.
anime type character.
Yeah, you get to Jar Jar Binks speaking that really deep Japanese voice. That'd be kind of funny, eh? It's like, oh, I love you. Oh. Anyway, whatever. Very, very cool. All right, so our discussion topic for the night, we're just going to get straight into it, is to talk about dystopian, not necessarily dystopian movies, but the societies in those movies and whether they could ever become real life in our Earth here. So to clear up a bit of misconception, one of the things that we don't want to cover off directly is post-apocalyptic movies. There's some similarity between them, but there's a vast difference between them as well. So we don't want to be any confusion. So, for example, post-apocalyptic movies. I'm not very au fait with TV shows. Claire's a bit more with that, but with the movies. So, no, we're not referring to the Mad Max series or the Book of Eli, the Postman, if you ever remember that. Things like Omega Man, I Am Legend, even the Terminator movies that are all set in the future, not when they're set here in our time, but the future version, and even the Planet of the Apes. So we're not like covering post-apocalyptic, we're dealing with dystopian. And with that in mind, just to avoid any confusion, Claire, what's your definition of dystopia?
Well, I mean, a dystopian society, it's basically an imagined society where that's not great, that there's lots of suffering, that the world isn't working, that people aren't really able to live decent sort of lives. That's really what dystopia is talking about. And the whole post-apocalyptic thing is interesting because quite often that's what leads to the dystopian society. You know, everything goes haywire and you know, nothing's working the way it should, and therefore we have to figure out a way to live. And quite often that's what you end up with, is a dystopian society. But yeah, it's about things not being great, not being good, the opposite of utopia.
Yeah, for sure. For myself, I sort of look at it and saying effectively there are two classes. You've got the elite and you've got the workforce, if you will. And the elite can be either rich people, the government, or strong corporate bodies. Usually the numbers aren't that great, but they overpower effectively the workforce, who are in greater numbers, and there's a great divide between one and the other, and there's usually no crossover. So it's not like in our society where you got rich people and poor people. It's not along those lines. It's almost like saying, well, okay, a poor person can work their way up through the career ladder and become successful and move into the other part of the world, if you will. Whereas in a dystopian society, the division is just too great, okay, and that the workforce is suppressed by the elite. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's one form of dystopian society, but it's not necessarily the only one. But it is the one that's most often depicted, that's for sure. And I think that's a function of the way we are now. I mean, it's actually really easy to sort of extrapolate from what we have now directly into that kind of dystopia where, you know, the rich are even richer and the powerful are even more powerful, and the poor are even poorer and have even less power than ever before. There are so many examples of that it kind of feels like that's the way it is. But it's really only one version of dystopia.
Yep, no, fair enough, and I agree. It is the common theme that's used in movies. Now, there's 2 points I want to cover off here. Now, Aaron's obviously, your lockdowns, curfews, and all that sort of awesome collectible shops still left open. And Colin has made mention of today. And, so I want to make a point of ensuring that it's nothing like that at all, okay? So we're deliberately avoiding current political climates, current political issues and political parties. Got nothing to do with that whatsoever, okay? So just push that out of your mind. We're not discussing any of that. And what we're having at the moment is just dealing with a pandemic situation. Once it's finished, and we'll go back to normal. But to give you some examples of dystopian movies, which follow, as Claire said, the most common theme. So just so everybody has a bit of an idea as to what we're talking about. So the movie Brazil was quite famous for depicting a dystopian society where the powerful sort of like suppress the workforce. Metropolis from 1927 make a big point of it. So all the workers live underground and they stay there just working the machines, which then power the elite up on the upper levels. The Hunger Games, which we discussed last week, is a fantastic interpretation of dystopian society. You've got the 13 districts, which end up being 12, and of course you've got the capital, right? So the workers and the districts support the capital, and the capital just like have lived the life of luxury. I've not seen this, and I don't know if you have either. The Handmaid's Tale is a very strong depiction of the dystopian society where the ruling class subjecting women to being inferior. I don't know what other word to use. Soylent Green is a great example of that, where you got, because of the overpopulation issues, well, everybody's sort of living on the streets and they're sort of living on top of each other, but the rich are still, as you mentioned, the rich are still rich and still in control and still have all the benefits that other people have. And of course, the granddaddy of all dystopian sci-fi stories, whether it be in novel form, book form, or even the TV, I think they're in TV series, 1984, right? That's the extreme end of what a dystopian society happens to be. So
yeah,
very cool.
I mean, that was mentioned. Someone mentioned that in the comments too, quite early on. 1984 is one of the best known dystopian fictions ever.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. Aaron said I never read the book. I don't know if you ever read the book Fahrenheit 451. Did you?
I have. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was originally a short story, and I read that in its original form, and then it was rewritten and published as a book. And it's been made into a movie a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No.
Yeah, I was going to watch. I didn't want to watch the remake. I wanted to watch the original. I think it's Francois Truffaut who did the first film, and I really wanted, to see that. And I just haven't had the opportunity, but I have read about it, and I thought, that'd be great to see what they did with that, because it's important to realize, especially in filmmaking side of things, from a science fiction perspective, a lot of mid to late 1970s movies backwards were all depressing and unhappy because the Cold War was on, the Vietnam War was on, and just everything was just miserable. So everybody just assumed that the world was just going to be complete crap for the rest of eternity, which is not necessarily the case. So there are a lot of examples of dystopian movies and TV shows, and as you said, they all vary in different ways. Like, for example, Clockwork Orange is a dystopian movie, but you wouldn't think so. That's a very, very subtle way of sort of showing you don't get to see the power government side that much, whereas obviously the other end of the scale, where you have the lower class people, you see that a lot. But there are some which are really, really common and some which aren't. Now, the question would be that if, like, our society was to head in that direction. Now, as of today, COVID issues notwithstanding, you say, well, it will never happen. But could it happen? And which film or TV show would it emulate? Which one is the most likely to? Now, I've got a couple of thoughts on it, but what do you think?
I don't know. I actually found it quite difficult to sort of pinpoint one, because there are so many sort of things going on that could lead to different outcomes, and different things in different places. There's a movie called Surrogates, which I don't know if it comes across as a fully dystopian society, but I think it actually is. Everyone, basically, no one leaves their home. They all use surrogates to go about their business. So they're living online effectively all the time. And to me, that's one of the things that we seem to be heading towards a little bit more and more, is people, living online and not getting out of the house and not meeting people in person and all that kind of stuff. So that was one for me that kind of stood out as a real possibility. I mean, we don't quite have the technology yet, but we're working towards it. Like, we're working towards the robots and the things that they use and the online connections and all that kind of stuff. So for me, that was a really big one that kind of feels like it could happen. I mean, it's a bit of a Hollywood movie, so it has a bit of a happy ending, I guess, where not all of them do. But to me, that's definitely one that I could see happening.
That's a good way of looking at it. I hadn't really thought of that one before, where the division or the controlling of people could be done through the technology. Who has access to what, who can get what, Fred over there has the latest and the greatest of this, whereas Charlie over here has an inferior version of that, and he can't get the advanced version for whatever reason. I don't know. That's a very, very good point. A couple of comments here. Thomas, A Clockwork Orange, apparently it is. I didn't think it was, but apparently it is definitely a dystopian society. It's very subtle. That's why I mentioned it's not as in your face as 1984. Colin has said Logan's Run. No, I don't think Logan's Run is, because all the people live in like a happy utopian lifestyle until they reach Carousel at the age of 30. So I wouldn't class Logan's Run. I mean, someone's clearly controlling that society, but no one's unhappy. They're all like living a very, very happy life, if anything. So, Matrix.
Point,
yeah, I don't think Matrix is, because I think it's like aliens that have taken over the world. And as far as we're concerned, everything's just as is normal. Like if we're in the Matrix now, you wouldn't know any difference. So I don't think that's necessarily the case. But sorry, Ready Player One definitely is. We discussed this last week, where take out the whole digital world, which may be where you're coming from. The invention of virtual reality could be the step. So if anything, maybe you're right. Maybe Ready Player One has the potential to be sort of closer to what could happen, where people are so invested in the digital world that their real worlds are actually suffering because of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's on my list. It was one of the other, it's actually the top of my list. It was one of the other ones that, to me, that's, it would be so easy for us to head down that path. All the online gaming that already happens, all the way people treat each other, the fact that you're hidden behind a layer of tech, means people can treat each other worse than they do. And that's a really easy path to go down to turn this into a dystopian society, for sure.
There was a game. It wasn't a game. It was an environment. Not Second Earth. Not Earth 2. That's for sure. It was like it wasn't VR, but it was the equivalent. You had an icon and you sort of ran around this second Earth. It was years ago. Somebody out there will know what it's called. That is probably the first step into where that could be sort of heading. And I agree with you. That would be the trick. And of course, people would go, especially younger people, would go off the deep end if they said, "Oh, I want to be a part of this virtual world, but I can't. I need money, or I need, authority, or I need this, I need that." And of course, the black market into hacking into these things and saying, "Well, I can say you an item that can get you up a few levels." Yeah, I think that has the potential of being extremely likely, especially with the pop culture thing added in. If you go to a virtual world and you say you can be anything you want, I'll be my favorite Star Wars character or Star Trek character, or whatever, you wouldn't want to leave. So, yeah, I think whoever said Ready Player One, I think Ange did. I think they're a bit more closer to being correct than they realise. Michelle's mentioned Gattaca. It is, but it isn't, because in this instance, they're talking about space travel. So they're saying you've got to be genetically engineered, and I read about it the other day, to be fit for space travel. But I don't know if they talk about the existing environment on Earth so much. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not entirely sure.
I think behind the scenes, I think a lot of the stuff that we don't see in Gattaca, the stuff that's hinted at, especially in terms of second-class citizens, is definitely leaning towards dystopia. But as you say, it's not sort of out there in the show. The focus is much more on space travel.
Exactly. Second Life. Yeah, that's right. I couldn't think of it, but I thought that'd be the thing. If you could do that in a virtual environment, yeah, you're right. Nobody would want to leave. So Ready Player One covers it off, as does the TV show Caprica, which also deals with the V world. And they even have a section of V world in Caprica that if you get de-resed or die in this particular environment, you can't return ever. That's it. So there's a big thing about saying you don't want to be killed off as a virtual character, because you can't get to that level ever again. And that is very, very interesting. So a lot of people are very paranoid about that. Yes, Darren, we did discuss V for Vendetta last week, and that's a classic example of the government controlling the people. Okay, so ironically, they've got like the curfews going on, and they have the finger men who walk around and like have all this authoritarian power. It's a big word for tonight. And that's exactly what that is. And especially in the case of V for Vendetta, where Great Britain's economy has just exploded and the USA has sort of died out. But that is a very good example. Now, Michelle's made a comment about Elysium. Now, I was going to bring this up because one of the things that I think that so as of today, we're sort of living in a pretty good, harmonious, I wouldn't call it utopian society, because there are people out of work and there are people who are living in the poor part of town and don't have money and unemployment and whatever. But the things that can really tip things in the wrong direction are, other than government dictatorships, environmental concerns, which is these days is becoming a very, very big deal. And there's a lot of effort trying to control that. But what if humanity can't control it and it does get out of hand? Overpopulation, and that is a big issue, especially some parts of the world currently, because especially with health improvements and longer people living longer, and like an aging population. Overpopulation could become a very, very serious thing. And of course, food shortages, which is related directly to overpopulation. So, I think those things need to be taken into consideration. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where something like Soylent Green comes in. The massive population. And there was a Star Trek episode too in the original series that was about exactly that, a planet that was so overpopulated because nobody was dying. They were all so well looked after and so healthy, and nobody died, that they could not control their population, and they were looking for ways to do that. That's definitely a big thing, and it's something in reality that we're potentially at the moment heading towards. And especially if you combine the two, the environmental disasters with the potential overpopulation and the resulting lack of food and resources, there's a lot of potential for us to be heading down that path, for sure.
So for those who aren't familiar with what happens in Soylent Green, there is an overpopulation problem, and there's a huge divide between the lower class and the upper class. So while the lower class is struggling to survive, the upper class is still existing as per normal. The problem is that behind the scenes, there is a massive food shortage. So where everybody's assuming food is coming from, which is the plankton in the ocean, is actually all dying out. But that doesn't stop the elite from changing their mindset as to what they should do about it. They just go, well, we'll just continue on as per normal. And it's the poor people, the lower classes, who still suffer from it. And that's the basis of the story, which is very, very cool. The way Aaron said, looking at Kevin Costner's Waterworld, that's where global warming comes into play. And I guess 20 years ago, that was a really, really big issue. And you are right. A lot of people are trying to address that now, saying, okay, how do you reduce carbon emissions and to deal with this problem? But the problem with the problem is that for everybody to sort of get on board and to address it accordingly. But if somebody doesn't, and like obviously they're saying that China uses they're a huge exponent of carbon emissions. Well, if it doesn't get fixed, what happens after that? And Waterworld is an extreme example of it, but it certainly could be head down that path. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the potential. Again, the potential is there. The levels of the water are already rising. There are cities that are struggling to stay out from under the water. The weather patterns are changing, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely something that can happen. It's a tricky one to solve, though, because it's a global thing, and we don't have a global society, really. We have a very fractured society, and if one part of it just decides they're not going to play ball, well, then there's a limit to what everyone else will be able to do.
Totally agree. And this is where I think Michelle's comment about Elysium and to a degree Blade Runner is very, very similar as well. I personally think that if it all went to the hell in a handbasket, the elite, whoever they happen to be, would say, oh, we'll just stuff the Earth, live on a space station. And for those who've never seen Elysium, the powers that be have produced this, and there's a special name for it. It's a space station that can revolve around itself, produces gravity in its own, like life support system or whatever. And all the rich people go and live on that. And they actually replicate things on Earth up on this space station, including houses and gardens and all the rest of it. But only the wealthy people can live there, okay? And all the poor people are left on Earth. And I think if that could happen, it would happen. And I think that it's saying, well, we can't fix the current problems here, so our elitist people, they'll go up there and they got it all great and wonderful. And I think Elysium has the potential of being, if they could do it, I think they would do it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, I don't know, to a degree, I think you're right. I think it's actually a very difficult thing to pull off, to only have the elite in one place. I think there's always going to be a need for grunts, for lack of a better term, to do grunt work. And like even things like security and that kind of stuff, you have to manage that somehow, and not everyone who's rich and powerful is going to want to do that kind of work. So I think if we reached a particular level of mechanical technology where we could do a lot of those things mechanically, then maybe. But it's one that I'm not convinced would ever actually happen, and that's why, because the rich and powerful aren't going to want to get their hands dirty. They're always going to want someone else who can do the dirty work for them, I reckon. That's, the way I
So
see
the
that.
solution to that is that's where they invent their androids and all the rest of it, machines that don't require like overtime and food and all the rest of it. And that's how you get around that problem. If you could do it, I think. I mean, for all we know, there are people out there or companies out there, they're trying to produce artificial robots and all the rest of it. And of course, recently you've had all the space travel thing with Elon Musk and all those guys. It wasn't Musk, it was the other guy, Richard Branson. But I think if someone somewhere said, you know what, if we could just leave, go to somewhere that is like the ultimate of utopia and leave all the poor people behind, I think some people probably would. But you are right; it won't happen in our lifetime. That's completely for sure. So
yeah, it would take a pretty advanced level of development before that could happen.
Yeah, exactly right. So Thomas has said he ends up with no choice but looking at the stars. The trick is who gets to go. So in the case of Blade Runner, though you don't see it, but they make a mention of the off-world colonies, the chance to begin again. That's what how they promote it. But not everybody can go. So if you're limiting the access, that's where your dystopian society comes from. Now, whether it be through health or your background or whatever else, that's like they're saying, well, I'm fit to go, I've got the money, and they go, no, we don't want you don't fit the mold. That's where the division comes from, and Elysium sort of took that a step further, but Blade Runner follows the same thing. So the last thing you want to do is say, oh, we got to fix, but not everybody can necessarily partake. So
it's a really interesting question, that, because there's always going to have to be some, unless you can take absolutely everybody, there's always going to have to be some way to decide who gets to go and who doesn't. And, in a completely fair society, it would be a ballot. It would be pure luck. You get picked or you don't, and you get to go if you get picked and you don't. But of course, the problem with that is you need to have the right number of the right type of people with the right knowledge and all that kind of stuff to actually make it work. And if your ballot ended up with not enough scientists, then it's just not going to work. So that's a really tricky question of who gets to go always.
It's also worth noting that in both cases, using Blade Runner and Elysium as an example, the elite only left the Earth when the Earth became stuffed up, right? It became a wasteland, a dead zone, or whatever. Okay, they didn't just leave like tomorrow because it's raining outside. So it's important to keep that in consideration. Things have to get pretty bad for people to start thinking about that. But there's a comment here from Aaron about saying if you had to evacuate the Earth, you couldn't evacuate everybody, right? That you'd need
of course not.
Yeah, so somebody's going to have to miss out. And, of course, that presents a whole lot of different arguments and discussions, like saying, well, okay, let's assume, and I'll use an extreme example here. What's a country? Give me a country. Tunisia, okay, in Africa, right? Just pull this one out of the air. They build a ship to leave the Earth. It's like the ultimate of things. It's wonderful for them. But what if only their people could go? You have to be a Tunisian citizen to leave, right? You just say, stuff everybody else, we're nicking off. So that then presents that problem as well. And it all comes down to who gets to go and who gets to stay. And yes, Michelle said that Richard Branson is working on building a cruise ship and space travel. Now it's very funny they should bring him up, because we're going to be discussing a topic next week that links personally directly to him, in my view. But we're not going to tell you what it is until next week, so you're just going to have to sit and wait. But yes, very, very, very cool.
Thomas's comment about putting a man on the moon half a century ago. We did that and then we stopped. Yeah, we did that and then we stopped. And you're right, Thomas. I think if we had put the money into it, we would be a lot further along than we are now. But at the time, it wasn't about that. It was about one-upping the enemy. It wasn't about the actual space travel. It wasn't about the actual, getting out there to stars. It was just about not being last. And I think that's a real shame. I think we should have kept going. I think we should be on Mars already by now, well and truly.
Which will probably bring up a future topic of if you're going to colonize Mars. I mean, seriously, if you're going to colonize it, who gets to go? There was a comment here from Darren saying about the movie 2012. Had that covered? Yeah, a lot of them did. So if you look at When Worlds Collide, was a very, very similar situation. There was Deep Impact. Whenever there's a catastrophe about to hit, who gets to hide away and like repopulate the Earth effectively when the dust has settled? And it wouldn't be like...
It's always the biggest question, always.
Yeah, yeah, whether it's the lottery, the lottery, as it were, or is it like, well, hey, you're a cool person, like Claire's way cooler than I am, so she gets to go and I don't because I'm just a turtlehead. So it's it is one of those things, and that would be, it's not, we don't talk, that's not a dystopian society. That's just like how the world turns. But you could certainly argue and go, well, hang on, if you need 5 people to go and you've got the 6th person, well, who's to say the 6th person isn't as important as the other? Oh no, it's just, that's a discussion for another day. So there you go. Yeah, exactly right. Well, we should be out there, but we're not. And I think when the time comes that we can go out there, I can guarantee I can probably think of a whole lot of cultures you never get to go. So for whatever reason. So there you go. Where are we? So interesting, Darren. The fat cats. The thing is that it's when you can't be critical of people who have gained wealth through just working hard. Okay, and for those who have achieved a lot, it's what they do with it, with that wealth and that power that makes the difference. So there are no end of stories of corporations, large corporations who buy out their competition of these little companies just so they can keep their monopoly, right? And there could be a school of thought that's saying, well, some corporations, some companies of the world are too big, too powerful. But is that to the detriment of society? And the answer is probably no. Not at this stage. But that doesn't create a dystopian society. That just means that one fish is bigger than another fish, and that's just how the business world works. And the business world is a very, very deadly world. So, yes. Oh, we've got Glenn joining us from YouTube. So good on you, Glenn. Good to see you again. There we go. He brought up a Battlestar Galactica reference. There's always room for that one of those, isn't there? So even in actually, it's very funny. Even in like TV series, as I'm going to bring back Caprica, all the different planets had different statuses, as it were. So Caprica was the top of the food chain, and all the ones below it were considered second-class citizens. So that you could almost argue was a dystopian society, albeit an artificial one. So what do you reckon? Fat cat and friends, yeah, exactly. Love it. So now I'm going to give you a couple of real-life examples. Believe it or not, now we're saying, like in Australia, we live a pretty free and easy existence, okay? And you're thinking, no, it's great, it's wonderful. Whether you're at the top end of the food chain or at the bottom, there's opportunities for everybody. It's absolutely wonderful. But believe it or not, there are, in my opinion, 4 examples of dystopian societies that either did exist on Earth or still exist on Earth, right? And before I read those out, what do people think they might be? Now, I told Claire earlier, so she's not able to participate in this discussion, but 2 of them don't exist anymore. One of them definitely exists, and the other one might exist. So we'll see what people think, and we'll go from there. But they fit the movie mold down to a T. Absolutely fantastic. So what do you reckon?
I'm not sure fantastic is how you want to describe
societies
that fit the dystopian mold. But yeah.
All right, very good. Oh, look, someone's on the ball already. So Darren has said China, Russia, and the USSR. Well, it's not Russia today. It was the USSR back then. So the USSR, definitely. They were like that. Their government controlled everything about their population, and that was clearly a dystopian society, as was, not is, was communist China. So communist China followed the same rule. These days, they've relaxed their mindset a little bit, and it's a little bit more open for the lower person to sort of have normal things based on Western society. But the USSR and communist China, definitely. So which is the one that currently still is? Anything you want to say about that, Claire?
Oh, probably
That's
not.
Right. So there's 2, there's one more, and there's a possibility, and the possibility is probably a little bit maybe far-fetched, but as of today, like right now while we're talking, it could potentially happen. So look at that, Michelle, give her that. Yes, North Korea, absolutely 100%. So based on everything that we know of North Korea, they are a complete dystopian society. If using any sort of the examples of sci-fi movies or TV shows you can think of, the government controls everything about the population, and the population are suppressed. And there's a huge divide between one and the other. And I think that's, if you ever wanted to see, because you look at the movies and you go, it can never happen. The fact is, it's actually happening right now. So very, very cool. Now, Thomas, the difference with America is there's a huge division between the upper class and the lower class, but one is not controlling and dominating the other. It's usually just how their lives turn out. And there's opportunities for the people at the lower class to move up the food chain. So America, especially the USA, isn't a dystopian society at all, even though it may look like that at face value. The one that obviously, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I was just laughing at the thought of America not being dystopian.
No, definitely not. There's
I
opportunities
mean,
for everybody.
according to the definitions that you're using, for sure, yeah. But
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
so many elements of it already present. Anyway.
There we go. Yep, very good. The vial has done it. So Afghanistan, I believe, is heading in that direction as of today, while we're talking on the air. So the Taliban, as you know, has taken over Afghanistan. Over the past 20 years, they've been living a relatively sort of westernized sort of lifestyle. And now that the Taliban have come back in, and based on what we've been told, there's a good chance that they will head back into being a dystopian society, especially the way they control and govern the freedoms of women. So, and no, Aaron, Albury Wodonga is just not even an acceptable answer. So there you go. But so it does go to show that it can and does happen even in our own society, and it's just amazing to sort of see that. And you can look at those places and go, you know what, these movies replicate what happened in the real world. It's like what do you call it? Life imitating art. Down to a T. What do you think?
Well, the whole life imitating art thing, it's art telling us what they think life is going to do, and then life going ahead and doing it. So it's definitely out there. But I mean, I get a bit stuck on the America thing, and what's going on in Texas now is, it could be the start of The Handmaid's Tale. I know you're not as familiar with that, Dags, as I am, but that started with something as simple as, like, the very first thing that made it obvious something was happening was that they locked down all the women's bank accounts, and then immediately went into the complete control of reproduction. Obviously, much more extreme than Texas at the moment, but it's that could just be the start. I find that quite scary. I think America was lucky they escaped their last president, because I think if that hadn't happened, we'd be possibly telling a different story.
Absolutely. Michelle just made a mention about left versus right. Yeah, well, they've definitely got a few. Well, some of them have got a few screws loose over there, and it's worrying how their society works, but it seems to work. I don't know. I can't figure it out. I don't really know much about it. We only go by what we see and hear on the news. Yeah. And the rich get richer over there and the poor get poorer over there. But for the sake of our particular discussion, we're not saying that the one dominates and has a foot clamped on top of the other. So
I think that is a lot. In a lot of ways, I think that is the reality, that they are under control, and there is a limit to the opportunities they have. And powerful, rich people control those opportunities much more than it might seem from the outside. But someone made a comment too earlier comparing the health system in America to the health system in the movie Elysium. And that's a really telling point, I think. If you control someone's health and someone's life, if they can't get the help that they need, then effectively you're controlling their life. I think that's one of the biggest divides in American society today. Just that access to health. And Elysium demonstrated that to the extreme.
Yeah, and absolutely right.
More extreme than exists now.
Yeah.
It's kind of
so in a lot of the movies that we've sort of looked at, I think it's not clear whether they're saying that the societies are global or just regional, so to a country, or is it like they say, well, the country's been controlled like this, but not the rest of the world. That's not really clear in a lot of cases, not all. But in the ones that we've seen, in the movies that you do see, you go, geez, you wouldn't want to be in that situation. But in a lot of cases, as you said, it's heading in that direction. And Thomas has made Total Recall. So we're talking about the remake, not the original version of Total Recall. And that actually is a good one. But they sort of and this is what you said, Claire, at the start about you had a post-apocalyptic event and a dystopian society came from it. That's exactly because all the earth is completely poisoned except for England and Australia, and the powers that be have taken over, and of course then you've got the huge divide between the rich and the poor, and that's exactly what you said. So one does actually lead into another, which I think is actually really interesting. So
quite often that's the case, and that's the problem with the apocalypse, of course, is that it completely changes everything, and what happens next depends on who's around and who gets control. There are some series out there and movies out there where it's not about control, where it's about sort of nobody has control, and so people take little pieces of control. Well, The Walking Dead as a series is sort of an example of that. It's a post-apocalyptic thing. Well, it's a during apocalyptic show more than anything else. But the idea of those little groups like the Negan takes control of a particular spot and a particular area, and how far they get is going to define what happens in that society later on. And I think the whole idea of that apocalyptic event, whatever it happens to be, whether it's, a pandemic or zombies or nuclear war or whatever it is, who takes control and how quickly and how completely they take control is definitely going to have an effect on what that society ends up looking like.
Totally agree, and that is actually a very, very good example. Yeah, you're right. You want to use post-apocalyptic for Walking Dead, but it's actually happening at the time.
It's not,
so it's not post-apocalyptic. It's
I'm trying to think, what's the phrase? It's not pre-apocalyptic. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's that bit in between.
yeah, and I totally agree with you. And you could argue that from a real life or real world scenario, had the COVID pandemic been far worse, and when I say far worse, where the mortality or fatality rate is greater than the infection rate, or is on a par, then who knows how our Earth today would look and how society would look, because it impacted everybody. So be thankful that the fatality rate versus the infection rate are vastly, vastly different. Yes, yeah, that's a sci-fi movie unto itself that you'd be thinking that could never happen, and it almost kind of did. So there you go.
Yeah.
I just want to answer Glenn's question. Glenn, you, someone else brought up Logan's Run earlier on, and we mentioned that no, it's not, because the people who are alive until 30 live in a utopian existence. So they just live in the big party mode until they turn 30, and see you later, sunshine. Yes.
Thomas mentioned In Time. That's an interesting one.
That one there. Yep.
Yeah. No. It's it's about the control that people have is the amount of time that you get to live, and time becomes a currency. So you can earn time, and you can lose time, and you can give time away, and that's totally about power. And they have, I guess I don't want to give away the ending, but they sort of turn into bank robbers, but what they're stealing is time. Yeah, it's actually a really interesting movie. And as Thomas says, Justin Timberlake is actually pretty good. I was surprised how much I enjoyed it, but how interesting it was, the story and the concept and what they did with it was really good.
Here's an interesting comment from Thomas. If you could control oxygen, which is obviously in the original version of Total Recall on Mars, the corporation could control the oxygen that people had, and you could, if in that sort of environment, yes, you could create your own world. If you were the supplier of oxygen in an off-world place, and you said, "Well, I'm just going to surround myself with my friends and closest allies and be damned with everybody else," then you are creating that dystopian environment, because the people who are at the bottom can't come up to the top, and you just have the monopoly on absolutely everything. So yeah, that's actually a very, very good one. And you never know if the environmental concerns of this Earth sort of really went down the tubes big time, and they just could not stop global warming no matter what. Now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, then someone who says, yes, I can actually have oxygen stashed over here, which is untainted. It's like the Negans of The Walking Dead. You could create your own little community and control everything about it. So
yeah, there's a Doctor Who episode that takes that concept to the extreme, to the point where they discover that it's happened over such a long period of time, that the lack of oxygen and the control that some people have of oxygen, that a second species evolves that doesn't need oxygen. I mean, that's extreme, obviously, and that's over a very long period of time. But it kind of harkens back a little bit to, my mind's gone. Oh, The Time Machine, the original story of The Time Machine, yes, where he goes so far forward that he finds this definitely dystopian society, where it has those two extremes, where it's developed to a point where there are two separate species, and they've evolved from, as far as we know anyway, they've evolved from the same sort of human stock, but one is absolutely, well, there's a twist with the time machine, but it's two completely separate societies, one underground, one above ground. It's all that kind of stuff, but that's taking that kind of stuff right to the extreme, that where it's over such a long period of time that evolution kicks in. That's an interesting one.
Exactly right, and that's the species you're talking about are the Morlock and the Eloy.
Yes.
Just chuck my little nerdy thing in there. The vials, very, very quickly. We're going to wrap this up very, very soon regarding Star Trek. Claire brought this up earlier about it's all well and good to have all the people in control, but someone has to do all the crappy jobs. And I suggested they could use robots for that to avoid having to use people. But yes, in Star Trek they don't really sort of cover it off the grease monkeys, as it were. There was a. Okay, yeah, there's always got to be a Firefly reference in here somewhere, so I thought I'd just chuck that in. Well done. And I haven't seen this one, Southland Tales. Have you seen this one at all?
No, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. And Thomas, that's actually a very, very good point. The Dalek Home Civil War, which Aaron's on board, he can tell me about a list. You had the Khaleds and the other side, and it was one effectively dominating the other. So, but yeah, I think that had a lot to do with it as well. We're going to wrap this up in about 10 minutes' time, but there are a couple of other examples of movies that had a really, really interesting sort of take on dystopian societies. So Dredd, which is the Judge Dredd environment, where everybody sort of lives in these big-ass monolithic buildings and are completely controlled by the judges, and that is one where the suppressed people are definitely suppressed and they're not going anywhere. So Escape from New York was another one which sort of touched on that society a little bit, where the corporations controlled everything. And, of course, those who were sort of left ended up being chucked in jail on Manhattan Island. THX 1138 is a classic example of that. I mean, you never get to see the people in control or who's in control, but those who are subjugated, they all look the same. They've all got the bald heads. They don't have names. And they all wear the same clothes, and that's a very, very good example of a dystopian society. And this is one that Aaron mentioned to me the other day, which is actually very relevant to what we discussed with Communist China. What Happened to Monday, which was a film dealing with overpopulation. And of course, as you know, Communist China had the thing of saying one child per family, and you're thinking, well, what happens if you have more than one kid? What happened to the second kid? And in this particular film, there are 7 kids, all genetically identical, and they've all got to pretend that they're the same person to avoid the issue of having the one-child family. It's very, very good. Wow. Noomi Rapace is in it, as is William Dafoe, which is very, very cool. Yeah, it's very good, Darren. Yes, you are the law. Very, very good stuff. So anything else you wanted to sort of bring up while we're sort of getting ready to wrap this discussion up?
Yeah, I mean, there was one other movie that I always think of in terms of dystopian society, but also in terms of where we could be heading, and that's it wasn't really sold as a sci-fi movie, but Idiocracy. I don't know if you've seen that, but the idea behind it is a perfectly ordinary guy takes part in a military experiment where he gets frozen and is supposed to be put to sleep, and he's supposed to be in storage effectively for like a year just to prove that they can do it. And then the project gets canned and he gets lost and he wakes up. I can't remember how far forward it is, but it's 100 years or 500 years or something like that. So it's way beyond a year. And when he wakes up, he discovers that, everything's falling apart. And when they sort of test him to figure out what job he should have, they discover that he is actually this totally ordinary, normal guy is actually now the most intelligent person on the planet. And what he has to go through and how he has to sort of literally save the world, because they've reached a point where they don't even know how to grow food anymore, and they think that sugary, soft drinky, energy drinky thing is the only thing that you can drink. That to me is almost the ultimate expression of where America is heading, at least, if not the rest of us. So yeah, I kind of think of that when I think about dystopia and where we might end up.
Very cool. I like this comment from Darren. Yeah, that China, after having the one-child policy, then negated it. I think it's down to 2 kids now. And you do wonder, realistically, it's very hard for people to just stay with 1 kid. So you do wonder, there could be some questions that could be asked about what happened to if there was a second kid born, whether it was by choice or accidentally. Thomas, you got your movies mixed up, dude. The Running Man, no one buying that for $1. That's actually from a RoboCop, which could be classed as a dystopian society, although I didn't really necessarily see it myself. A big corporation doesn't necessarily, OCP did control everything, but the movie made it seem a bit more serious than what it really was. So maybe it was. That's bad English. Maybe it was a dystopian society. And of the lot, though, while we just sort of wrap this up, I tend to think, and I don't know who mentioned it, and I agree with you, Claire, that Ready Player One is probably the closest I can think of to where a dystopian society could come from in our world, creating a virtual environment that everybody wants to be a part of, but only certain people can, and the restrictions involved with that, and it just drives the rest of the real society completely troppo because they just want to be a part of this fake environment. And I think that's got something to do with it. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely one of the, I mean, you can just imagine the number of people that would want to escape their lives even now and live in an online world. And as the rest of the world gets worse and worse, then more and more people would want to do that. So yeah, it's definitely something I could see happening. For sure.
Very good. And Thomas, when you mix up your movies, Running Man and RoboCop, never try and out-nerd the nerd. That's my philosophy of life. So it's very, very cool. One other thing, too, for everybody who's watching the show, if you think of topics that you want us to discuss or to bring up, feel free to just post them, whether you do it on the Facebook page or wherever else. So we are open to suggestions and ideas. So, it is an open forum. This is the kind of thing where, one, this is replicating what would be like a convention panel. So there's no presentations, there's no pictures, just purely discussions, or what, and Claire and I have done this plenty of times, just been at parties with a whole bunch of friends, and this stuff just comes up in the middle of the night. You've had a few too many, or had a bit too much wacky tobacco looking at some of Claire's pictures earlier, and you go, I just want to talk about this. And that's exactly what this show is all about. So we're just chin wagging away, having a bit of fun. So feel free to definitely contribute. Which is absolutely.
And Michelle's just made a comment about Idiocracy. Yes, I think you're right, Michelle. You will probably only ever want to watch it once, but it does make you feel kind of smart.
Hopefully, people don't see this show in the same way and they go, you know what? I've seen Sci-Fi Zone once. I never want to see it again. So. There you go. And Darren is back saying, I love the new hair. So there you go. So yes, it brings out the colour of her eyes, which is absolutely fantastic. So there you go. All right. So we're going to wrap the show. Hopefully everybody out there has actually enjoyed it. Wait till you see what we've got next week. That'll be a bit of a because we have brain-bending, mind-twisting stuff. So that's exactly what it's all about. So are there any final words you want to toss in before we sign off, Claire?
Oh, I don't know. Just, be nice to people. Otherwise, that's how we're going to end up.
Yeah, exactly right. So there you go. Otherwise, in the interim, make sure you all stay in the zone. All right. Bye for now. See you next Monday. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.